TV. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be your host today, and it's also my pleasure to have with us in our studio our special guest today, Representative Patti Komline.
Thank you.
Patti, thanks for being here and making the time to come.
Thanks for inviting me.
Patti Komline has been a representative in the state legislature since 2004. She represents the towns of Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor, and has held a variety of leadership positions within the Republican caucus in the state legislature. Patti, great to have you with us today and to help get us up to date on what's going on up in Montpelier. One of the issues that has bubbled up that you and one of your colleagues in the legislature, Representative Heidi Sherman of Stowe, have been spearheading is an initiative to repeal and replace Act 60, Act 68, the state's education financing law. And for those of you who have been not paying attention for the last 20 years about taxes and education financing, which I think is probably close to zero in this audience, but Act 60, 68 obviously is the state's education financing law. It grew out of a state Supreme Court decision in 1997, which held that Vermont's education financing plans were unconstitutional. That led to Act 60 bringing in a statewide property tax designed to level the playing field so that less affluent communities would not be at a disadvantage to more affluent ones when it came to offering programs and education quality in their schools. It was a very controversial measure at the time. It was amended in 2003 by Act 68. It has remained a source of controversy ever since, I think it's fair to say. And Patti, you and Heidi have now come along with an initiative which includes an online petition. Before we're over, we'll want to give you an opportunity to say where folks can go to sign that petition online. That would simply eliminate, essentially, Act 60. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you and Heidi to try and launch this initiative and why you think it's the right way to go at this point?
Sure. Well, coming into town meeting week, there was a lot of angst in the State House. People were really concerned having to face their voters, knowing that last year we had a pretty big tax hike with, I think, 5-cent increase on the residential rate for Act 60 and a 6-cent increase on the non-residential rate. And so people were really dreading going to their town meetings, knowing it was going to be about 7 cents for the residential rate this year. And we've been frustrated for years, and it's just so complicated. And the governor blames the school boards, the towns blame the state, and the property taxes still increase. So I thought if we could then, we've tried at the State House with not much success, because we're a pretty small minority, and I thought if we could actually motivate people in towns to kind of rise up and put pressure on their state representatives to say, let's repeal it in 2 years. That gives us 2 years to find something else, repeal and replace, and find something that adheres to the Brigham decision, which we think is laudable, and is a Supreme Court decision, that is less complicated because it's now so convoluted no one understands it, and that better connects voters to the school budgets they pass and then the property taxes they end up paying. And it gives us 2 years. Act 60, I don't know about 68, but Act 60 was devised in 103 days or something. So this is 2 years. And if we got near that deadline and we weren't quite ready, well, we can just move that deadline. So it's not going to dismantle a system without anything in its place. But it holds legislators' feet to the fire to do something. Because I'm in Ways and Means where a plan would come up. And every year, we scratch our heads and wring our hands and decide, well, income sensitized people didn't get hit as much last year and feel as much pain. So this year we're going to kind of ding them. And we just kind of rotate who feels the pain rather than come up with something better. So that was the effort. And so we have over 1,000 Vermonters, probably 1,100 Vermonters signed on to that now. And we were waiting this was for an amendment to be put on our property tax bill, which came out last week. So we put the amendment on it, and it failed. And it was straight party lines, with the exception of a few people. Your reps here in Manchester, Cynthia Browning and Jeff Wilson. Jeff's been very supportive all along. They supported the repeal. There was a rep. There were a couple others, maybe 3 or 4 other Democrats, but it went down. And the debate on the floor is more about, there's nothing better than this. We can't come up with anything better. And I might not be able to come up with something better, but I can put the people in a room that I know that could come up with something better. And they need to be motivated. And nobody there is motivated. And hopefully now that we have this list of people that, that signed on, and I can contact them, hopefully they'll help us recruit people that will, they'll remember this in November, and they'll get people elected that want to do something.
Well, that's been the big criticism so far, is that, what do you mean? I think Shap Smith, the House Speaker, called it irresponsible to toss out Act 60 and that whole framework without having a replacement in place. I mean, what would a new format look like? Do you think?
There's three ideas that come to mind right away. One is actually they put it in our property tax bill. It said we will transition to an income tax. They put that in without any testimony. They just kind of threw it in there. And it would say that for the non-residential people, they would stay as they are, paying as they do. But income-sensitized people and the regular per penny ratepayers, property owners, would pay like a flat property tax statewide of about 40 cents. And then everything else is made up on an income tax based on what your budgets are passed in your towns. It's a little simpler. There are problems with that. There's problems in that 1/3 of our population are renters. Renters tend to be lower income. This would be a new income tax on renters. The implementation of this would cost anywhere between $50 and $200 million, which we don't have. So this was actually put into our property tax bill to say we were going to start transitioning to this next year. But there's no language that says if this proves unworkable, let's go to something else, which I tried to get put in the bill, and they wouldn't. There's another suggestion. This is Representative Sherman's suggestion that we, instead of a statewide property tax, we have regional property tax rates. We kind of consolidate. I know the bill that's talked about now is this consolidation. She has it around technical centers. And so you have these regions, and in these regions you have a property tax rate. That's another suggestion. And then another one was identify what an essential education costs. And, go through the exercise of identifying that amount of money. And then every school gets that. And if they want to spend more than that, they raise that on their own. If you want to AstroTurf your football field, you pay for that on your own. So those are just three suggestions off the top, but I'm sure there are others. We put the right people in a room. We're not going to be doing that, though.
So, I mean, the bill, as you mentioned, was defeated in the House in a roll call vote recently, last week, I guess. Does that mean it's sort of moribund for now, or it just depends on how many signatures you can get on this online petition?
No, I think I'll still keep collecting signatures because I think, like I said, I think for recruiting, I think this is something that's important. And, people struggle with voting for Republicans. We have a very bad national name. I don't think Vermont Republicans are the same as national Republicans, and people can just check my voting record to attest to that. Right. So I think if people can overlook that and realize what's not being done at the State House, what needs to be done. I mean, there's some important issues, and we're really not doing very important things that really are important to taxpayers. We tried to get an amendment on this property tax bill last week for mandates that said, if the state is passing mandates on schools, one we heard about last year, I think we passed, was a concussion bill, which was an important bill, but it cost schools $750,000 to fund this mandate. So this amendment we put out said that any mandates that come from the state that are imposed on schools will be paid for out of the general fund rather than have the schools support, have to support the changes we make in Montpelier. Not only did they not want to support that amendment, but they didn't even want to vote on it. And what they did was they hijacked our amendment. They took it, they stripped it out, and they put something harmless, meaningless in there, so they don't have to be on record as voting for that. So they're still imposing mandates on the schools, and then they want to, get angry with the schools and say they're not doing enough to cut their budgets. And when you look at the budgets that came in this year, they were at 3%. I mean, the schools did a good job in keeping their budgets under control. There are 43 towns that decreased their school budgets, and their property taxes went up.
And that was due largely to the way the financing law operated, and there were these wide splits between what the local district school budget might have gone up, let's say 3%, but the town's tax rate would have gone up to 10, 11, 12% in some cases. Right.
There's one, the town of Ira just comes to mind. They decreased their school budget by 12, almost 13%. And I think their property tax rate was going up either 14 or 17 cents. That's crazy.
I mean, I'm tempted to ask, without trying to get too into the weeds of this kind of stuff, but how does that happen?
Well, what you have to look at is two things. You have to look at what the budget does and what per pupil spending is. And out of the 43 towns where their budgets decreased, 31 also had per pupil spending decreased. You have to look at that number as well, because sometimes you lose students, and the property tax rate is driven off of a per pupil rate. So out of the 31 towns where their per pupil spending went down and their budgets went down, a week after this all happened, people at the state still couldn't explain it. So it took them a while to figure it out, and that's concerning when the experts in the state are scratching their heads saying, "I don't know how this could happen." It says the system's broken. Some of it had to do with CLA, right? Common level of appraisals were affected, and then also if you sent your kids to other schools, sometimes you didn't have a high school in your district, so you tuition them out, and maybe the tuitions in those towns went up, but your school budget was down. And now I'm into weeds that I barely understand. It's really complicated, really broken.
Well, hopefully, if your efforts pay fruit in the long run, you'll come up with a format that's a little bit simpler for the average person to understand,
I think that's
and for even the experts to understand. I guess.
It would be nice.
Well, the House Education Committee recently passed a bill that would aims to consolidate school districts. It's received a lot of attention around the state. And a highly mixed reception as well. Folks who are fans of local control and wanted to keep decision-making as local as possible are a little concerned that an attempt to consolidate the education structure into, I think it's 30 or so kind of large regional districts with at least 4 towns in each district and at least 1,250 students, I think, is going to kind of, wreak havoc, I guess, on Vermont's educational system. Do you think that this consolidation measure that the House Education Committee has approved, and I guess we'll be going to a vote through the legislature sometime between now and May, is a step in the right direction, controlling costs and dealing with some of the issues you feel prompted your effort to repeal Act 60?
Well, when this bill came out, the Education Committee said this has nothing to do with controlling costs. Then it comes to our committee, and there's a lot of talk about what kind of costs it could control. But it's not clear how it would control costs. They talk about consolidating ordering paper and supplies and things like that, being able to share teachers, which I think we do at a BRS supervisory union level anyway. I think we have a lot of I forget, over 200 school boards, I think, in the state. I mean, we have a lot of school boards, and there's a lot of meetings that our superintendents have to go to. So I think simplifying that in some ways is a good thing. There's a lot of pushback from the schools on this if they're losing their local school boards. The bill has come out of education. There was $4 million sitting in a supplementary education fund that now they've taken to say, well, we're going to need this over the years to implement this, to study it and for whatever. So it's already costing us $4 million on what, I'm not sure. So the bill is with us. I don't know when it's leaving us. Then it has to go to appropriations because they are taking this money and they're going to have to spend a number of days on that. Then it goes out, and then it goes over to the Senate where it has to go to 3 different committees too. And we're out in about 5 weeks, so I don't really see how we're going to have the time to do this. I really don't. Not do it the right way, certainly, but we'll see what happens. But I was
so if it doesn't make it through that long and winding road, then to passage, you start over from scratch again next year.
Next year's a new biennium, the beginning of a new biennium. They have to start from scratch, and they've done a lot of the work, and hopefully they can pick up from there and maybe improve on it and spend maybe the summer would be a good thing, going around to towns. And there's going to be a lot of winning people over. We did this in Londonderry with, they call it a RED, Regional Education District. They tried to make it so towns could do this if they wanted to, and that was the only area in the state that decided to do it. And they were fairly homogeneous, and it went fairly smoothly and took a few years. But that's been successful. One of the concerns is when you draw these districts, school choice is a big issue, because what they're saying within a district, if one of those schools has school choice, well, now you have to give that to all the schools in that district. And a lot of people in the state don't like school choice. So that's going to be a big stickler of the pushback. They're going to want to take away. A lot of people are going to want to take away choice. The people who haven't want to preserve. They feel very strongly. 93 towns have some element of school choice. That's going to be the big crux in this, I think.
And where do independent schools fit into all of that? I mean, how does that work? I mean, will they have to abide by the same rules as public schools?
Well, that's what I'm talking. That's we don't know. And they should be very concerned with this move, because if they say, well, there's choice within this district for public schools, but not independent schools, then they lose the vouchers that they get now. They seem to carve out the 4 academies, Burn, Burton, St. Johnsbury, Thetford, and Linden. But then it's the next tier down.
Right. Like Long Trail School, for instance.
Long Trail, Maple Street in our area. Yeah, people should be
Mm-hmm.
concerned about this bill.
Interesting. Well, education spending, Act 60, are just a couple of the issues that have been taking up your time in Montpelier. I'm sure there's a host of others. And the other big issue, at least that seems to be the case from down here, is the whole question around Green Mountain Care, single payer, and more importantly, how it's going to be paid for, the financing mechanism. The governor has been kind of reticent, I guess would be one way of putting it, to spell out how he proposes to pay for the package of benefits. What's going on with that? I mean, technically speaking, the administration is in some sort of legal jeopardy, I guess, since they were supposed to have come up with a plan for this about a year ago, more than a year ago, actually. Is there going to be any action that is going to shed some light on that before the session ends in May?
No, we thought there was going to be. In our committee, we got a lot of education on healthcare, which I was very grateful to have in the beginning of the session. And then the governor announced a few weeks ago that he wasn't going to be presenting any kind of plan this year. So we stopped. We stopped our education on. But it was eye-opening. And our committee is 11 people. That's where a financing plan has to be approved first. The makeup of that committee are, let's see, there's 3 Republicans, an independent, and the rest are Democrats. And I can't think of anyone in there who's excited about anything they were telling us. They were really, really concerned. The 2 biggest skeptics, I would say, is Jim Condon from Colchester, who's a Democrat, and Jeff Wilson. I think did a really good job of articulating what the concern should be. And it's kind of like you need to know, in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you are. And since we're so early with the exchange, we don't really have numbers of what's going on now. We only know where we were. So we need a few years to kind of see how the exchange does. And then from there we can say how many people are signed up, what kind of coverage are they getting, what are the costs, and then from there go into this implementation of something grander. But the governor's people don't want to do that. They want to charge forward, but with less information
I suppose
than we
one
have.
could say, well, yeah, why not wait to get it right and really fine-tune it so that we don't have a rollout a la the health exchanges.
Right. I mean,
October,
that should be
into a
some kind of
disaster.
lesson for us. We're still having problems with that. And I'd like to say, if people are having problems on their own, I was at dinner the other night with some people who are struggling, and I said, let me know, because I've got a wonderful person at the state who does help the people with their problems. So if anyone is having problems still signing up for the exchange, because the deadline is missed. But a lot of people that signed up are concerned. Their checks were cashed, but they don't have cards, they don't have numbers, they don't know if they're insured. And I've got a really good contact at the state level that's helping people one family at a time, which is not the way to do this.
Do you think it's feasible for Act 48, I think it was Act 48, that established the Green Mountain Care and set the course for single payer, which is supposed to kick in 2017? I mean, could that deadline be pushed back to 2018 or further? If
We
necessary?
tried to get that pushed back, and what they keep talking about 2017, and they have reasons for that, they have political reasons, because if the makeup in D.C. changes, they may not get their waivers. So that's why they want 2017. But there are triggers that have to be in place before Act 48 takes effect. So it's not actually 2017. It's just these 4 triggers have to be met, and then it takes effect. So they talk 2017 because of these waivers they need. They also keep saying single payer. Well, the governor keeps saying single payer, but his people say we are not doing single payer. We can't do single payer in a state. And yet he keeps calling it that, which I really get frustrated with.
Well, single payer implies that everyone gets their reimbursement for health insurance from one source, the government.
And we all pay through that one source, and we all get our benefits through that one source.
Right.
But you can't, at a state level, you can't do that. I emailed somebody about that, and I said it's impossible, and they said, well, nothing's impossible. If you say that, it is. It's impossible for a state to get. There's Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, which is the military benefits. ERISA plans, which are any self-insured. I had thought initially that was big companies that have multiple businesses in multiple states, but it's not. It can be a business in your state that has a self-insured plan. Any of those groups are not covered. They're trying to get waivers for a couple, but I believe it's TRICARE, Medicare, and ERISA. You can't get waivers to force them into this pool with all of us. So the less people you have in this pool, it defeats the purpose of what they're saying that would bring down rates. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Sort
Yeah,
of?
this whole issue I find very puzzling and confusing, sort of like Act 60, I guess.
Right.
But,
I mean, you want as many people in your insurance
Yeah.
risk pool as possible. And that was the idea, get every Vermonter in that pool, right? That would be single payer. Get
Right.
every Vermonter in there, and then we're going to be able to save money on administrative costs. Everybody's going to have these, a certain level of plans they can choose. But you can't force these groups into this plan. And so now you have a smaller risk pool, and you've got the same, and you've got all these exceptions, which you're not going to realize your administrative savings now because
right, and the cost will be higher. Interesting. Well, one other issue that also seems to be getting a lot of attention lately is this business around GMO labeling. There's a bill, I gather, before the legislature to force companies to accurately label the substances that go into their products. On its face, that doesn't sound unreasonable, but I gather you have some concerns about that.
Well, there's a group of states are joining together and passing this, and they're waiting for one state to kind of just do it, to pull the trigger, and because there's going to be a lawsuit, and everybody knows there's going to be a lawsuit, and it's going to be an expensive
that would be from
lawsuit.
Monsanto, the food supplier company?
Right, and this is a lot of people, not everybody, a lot of people have voted for this because they just they're concerned about Monsanto, and I can understand their concerns with Monsanto. But we'll end up having to pay for the lawsuit if we pass this. And I think when the Senate is passing this, they have a fund where you can donate money for the lawsuit, which sounds pretty silly to me. And I don't see why we need to be the first. There's a group of states, the pressure's building for someone to do something. And it's going to be at least $2 million. That's a lot of money to Vermont. We don't have a good...
for the lawsuit?
For the lawsuit. Okay. We don't have a good track record of winning lawsuits when the state is taken on by these things that we pass. We really don't. So I can't support it like it is.
How many states would have to sign on to this until
I don't recall.
You'd have enough kind of critical mass, as it were, to kind of make
I'm not
it work?
sure. This was coming out of the Senate.
6 or 7 or something like that.
6 or 7, yeah, that sounds right. But this isn't something I've been focused on, so I'm not sure. But I've brought up the point of gluten. I mean, I don't know why we can't say, things may contain glutens. People who have gluten allergies, they're very serious allergies. People with celiac disease. And I would look to say, if you're going to do this, why aren't we just adding, why is it just GMOs? I think because there's a link between that and Monsanto. And I don't want to take on a lawsuit from Vermont's perspective, given the track record and the costs. So we have other states behind it.
Another issue is the minimum wage question. The federal government, I guess, would like to see states increase their minimum wages up to about $10.10 an hour, up from the current level of, I think it's like $7.25 or so. Is the basic minimum, and here in Vermont, I think we're at $8.73 an hour. With lower income folks really struggling in this economy, that seems, again, like kind of a reasonable idea. Is the question simply around whether or not that gets phased in 1 year or 3, or is the $10.10 per hour number just too high, do you think?
Well, there are people in the state that want it to go to $12 or $15 an hour, so we do have our progressive wing.
Right. That's the livable wage
yes,
number?
Right, which would be really nice if we could afford that, if businesses could afford that. But what passed out of the House last week, or will be passing out this week, passed out of committee, was 10-10 by next year. The governor wanted it, which was the president's proposal of phasing in over 3 years. So there'll be a Republican offering amendment to do that, to do what the governor actually and the president want, is phasing in over 3 years. The pressures we've heard from businesses are, if they've got employees that are making more than that, are making $10 an hour, they're going to have to give everybody a raise, kind of bump everybody up. So it's going to be a pretty big impact. We on Vermont Digger did a great article with Tom Cavett, our economist, that talked about how much it actually is going to cost us. It was surprising how in ways that we're not always aware of.
Do you think that this will de-incentivize businesses to hire more people? I mean, if they're looking at higher labor costs like that, I mean, is that something that might tend to kind of retard the hiring process?
We're told that. What I'm also told is that responsible businesses use this as a recruitment tool. People here in town have told me, you know, the very well-respected employers say, you know, I have really good wages. I pay people more than minimum wage, and that's how I get good employees. You know, and they use that to be competitive. And now we take that away from people as well. So I don't think it's going to break the backs of anybody over 3 years. I think, unfortunately, times have changed, and people. It used to be that the minimum wage jobs were not what people depended on to survive. I think times have changed, and many times they are. I had thought of putting in something that said if it's part-time people, you know, if it's under 40 hours a week, well, maybe then they can make less than that. Fortunately, the concern is that people will then just cut all their employees to 30 hours a week.
Right.
You know, so that doesn't work. But it's maybe something for if you've the first 3 months you make a little less than that. That would seem reasonable. It's while you're being trained for something to help the businesses out a little bit, because it's tough on businesses. I mean, I don't think we do much up in Montpelier that says, how can we help them out? It's more, how can we get more money from them?
Wow. We have time for just one last question, and I guess can't resist asking. Your colleague Heidi Sherman has indicated that she's considering a run for the governorship as a Republican to oppose Peter Shumlin. Would it be, just to loop back to the start of our conversation here, would it be reasonable to assume that repealing Act 60 would be a big part of her platform, or is that just one part of a larger piece?
Right. I'm not sure repealing it as much as coming up. She's got this plan that she's talked about for years, so she would be talking about her plan, I'm sure. And she also worked very diligently with Representative Paul Ralston from Middlebury on an economic development proposal. And it's very comprehensive, so I think she pushes on that a lot. She's in the Commerce Committee. And she's one that keeps talking about we don't have to slice the pie thinner, we can grow the pie, you know, and do more for business, and that trickles down to all of us. And I think that will be her big two issues.
Well, we'll be looking to see where she lands on this question. I think it would make it for a very interesting race myself.
Sure would. Yeah.
Well, Patti, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to talk about the issues that you're dealing with up in Montpelier. And thank all of you for watching as well. This has been The Front Page on GNAT TV. I'm Andrew McKeever. Pleased to be here today with Representative Patti Komline of Dorset, Danby, Mount Tabor, Peru, and Landgrove. I got them all. And thanks again. We'll see you next time.